Dr. Mark Changizi here, through Science Moment. We are on Science Moment 340, and today I'm going to talk about one of the things that's been central to my kind of push, the kind of thing that I've been pushing since the start. When I first tweeted and pinned my tweet that the real issue, the real moral of coronavirus 19 will concern the mass hysteria that occurred, not the epidemiological concerns that everybody was worried about. This is a psychosocietal phenomenon. This is what's going to wreck society and what did in fact hurt society, and we're still going to be recovering this. We're still recovering. We will be recovering this for a generation. Now, and much of what I focused on, what we focused on at FreeX, at the Free Expression Research Institute, freex.group, what Dr. Tim Barber in my book, Expressly Human, is about. And what I've been really on about on my Substack is trying to understand mass hysteria and trying to understand culpability and responsibility and what it means in the context of societies when they fall down the path of mass hysteria, and contrasting with this sort of opposing point of view where these sort of mustache-twiddling people outside of it who are puppeteering everybody, and so we should just give the tyrannical leaders who did this to us and the experts who did this to us and the public policy folks and the commentators, all these folks, well, they're really not culpable because it was these mustache twiddling people on the outside. No, this is the wrong way to think about it. People seem to have the attitude that unless they knew they were doing evil, they should just be excused. And this is a completely sixth grade kind of notion of culpability and moral responsibility. Now, I recently wrote up a short Substack, and I'm just going to quickly read it, walk through it. I think it nicely isolates the point that I've tried to make across hundreds of Science Moment videos. Again, we're on Moment 340 now. I think it nicely summarizes it in a short and sweet way, and I think it's worth having a video version of it. So let me just walk through, and I'll pop up the tweets the way that I broke it up in terms of a tweet thread as I walk through it. All right. So, who is responsible for the COVID interventions? 1. Imagine an avalanche on a mountainside filled with rocks. Some tiny insignificant pebble at the top shifted, bumped into several others, each which bumped into more, and so on until the entire slope began sliding down as one. Now imagine instead that each rock is a person, and rather than being physically knocked downhill to knock into others, each is socially pressured to pressure others. Perhaps several of my social network neighbors are fearful of a pandemic and agitating for immediate suspension of civil liberties for society's safety, and I'm accordingly subjected to considerable social force to join in with the movement. A people version of an avalanche we call a mass movement, mass hysteria, groupthink, riot, moral panic, stampede, etc., depending on further details. Now, although there are crucial similarities between an avalanche of rocks and a mass hysteria, or one of these other variants, of people, one key difference is that people, but not rocks, have free will and can choose not to be part of it. By refraining to slide, despite being pressed to do so, a person not only doesn't end up part of the mass hysteria, but also thereby doesn't further its spread. A small number of folks in March of 2020 were such steady rocks. They never got swept up into calling for lockdowns, not for a minute and not for 2 weeks. But most slid, at least for a while. Some slid for only a short stint and woke up. Others slid for many months before digging their heels in, and others are still sliding to this day, pressuring their neighbors on the mountainside, the social network, to continue sliding. Unlike rocks, these human sliders bear responsibility for the mass hysteria, and the larger the social forces the person could impart, the bigger the boulder, the more responsibility he or she bears. Many of those who stopped their sliding eventually joined the anti-lockdown movement, often failing to note that they initially were part of the avalanche. And many of these anti-lockdown latecomers are now some of the loudest voices demanding to know who did this to us. They point to China, the WEF, Klaus Schwab, Event 201, Bill Gates, etc. They excuse or minimize the culpability of the actual leaders, public intellectuals, journalists, and experts who in fact did this to us. And their largest blind spot is themselves. They are among those culpable. They contributed to the very mass hysteria that bred wholly ill narratives and civil liberties violating interventions that it will take a generation to recover from. They are the boulders at the bottom of the mountain who started near the top, helped ensure that the avalanche was as large as it was, and who then stamped and screamed among the debris at the bottom, demanding to know who caused the avalanche. These boulders will invariably never see their own culpability. They won't rest until they find a true evil mastermind, scapegoat, who caused the avalanche. Right? Now, if you want to read this, and you can go to my Substack and find it there. I think that summarizes the point in a relatively elegant fashion about what I've been pushing in many different ways, and 100 different ways in my Science Moments series. If we're going to understand and defuse these dangerous mass hysterias, which are the kinds of things that are responsible for the great genocides and the great democides, minor and major ones, then we have to understand mass hysteria, and we have to understand that when these things happen, those are the greatest evils that occur. Society level evil occurs by people who are trying to help you because they've been caught in a mass hysteria and they believe what they're doing is righteous. We don't need to look further for mustache twiddling people on the outside who caused the mass hysteria. No. There's plenty, there are forces there's many forces, journalists and public policy folks and Event 201 people. Indeed, they had the wrong set of principles that led them to believe that we should start censoring and pushing top-down messages to help everybody if there was a pandemic. All of these folks contributed to what became a snowball. None of them initiated and purposely initiated the snowball per se. That's quite a different thing. And continuing to look for the one who started the snowball is a conceptual fallacy. And if you misunderstand what occurred this time, you're not going to be able to solve these events, which will always be with us. And that was your Science Moment. Come find us at freex.group, where we study these sorts of things. The freex.group, the Free Expression Research Institute. Take a look at our new book, Expressly Human. You can find it at bookstores everywhere. And you can find the series at Substack and find the series especially at YouTube and at Rumble.